Hey, just making sure I'm audible.
You are.
Great. POIs in the chat, please. Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Look, war has been raging in Europe for 2 years at this point. We know the Germans are coming. We know they're going to indiscriminately bomb civilians in this attack and in each following attack once they invade. We know that the occupation is going to be rough. And we know that the people we're talking about, the actors in this motions, are soldiers uniquely trained and uniquely prepared to fight this fight. They have known this moment was coming. They have known that they need and must find the invaders. They joined up for this specific issues. And so we think that they themselves must take the fight, must give it their best shot, and must try to do as much damage to the Germans and save them, or do the most for their countrymen and for their surroundings. 2 points in my speech. Firstly, why they have the principal moral obligation to take to the sky. Secondly, why we will likely save at least some lives. Okay, first point about obligations, right? These soldiers are soldiers who volunteered to fight, who spent years training and preparing for this moment. And so we think they have unique skills and are in a unique position in which they are morally obligated to take the fight. 4 reasons for this. Firstly, again, these are soldiers. They knew that this would happen. There's no surprise. The Germans have been going all across Europe for years at this point, including attacking their former allies and invading their countries, killing everyone in sight and doing tremendous damages. We think that because they knew and because under these conditions, they signed a contract and swore an oath to protect their country and to do their utmost for it, even in the face of death and even in certain death, they are obligated to do it in this situation as well. Secondly, we think they have a chance to do it, right? They have a chance when they take to the skies to maybe shoot down a few German bombers, maybe save some bombs from falling on the citizens of Belgrade, maybe doing some good. And we think any actor who has the capacity to do this sort of good for other people must do it, even if it does some harm to themselves, because the benefits to other people are tremendous. Remember, every bomb, every 500-pound bomb that doesn't fall on civilians saves dozens of lives, as opposed to the lives of 1 or 2 crew members of these airplanes. Thirdly, we think, simply put, they're uniquely positioned, right? Being the only ones who can act, being that the entire society knew they're there, knew they're in the Air Force, and expect them to take flight and to do whatever they can for the country because they said so, because they said that they will, and because everyone around them did not take other actions, did not flee the city, did not sign up to fight for themselves based on the knowledge that these people are going to fight when the time comes. We think if they don't take to the sky, they have fundamentally denied others their autonomy, right? They withheld information, they effectively lied to others to make sure that they're in the unique position because there were probably some benefits or because they believe they should be in the army. And so we think if they don't fulfill their obligations, they've fundamentally attacked these people. Fourthly, we think, simply put, when someone so horrendous, so aggressive, comes for your country, comes for your countrymen, and tries to kill them, you have a moral obligation to do whatever it takes to fight them, because the good of your country and the good of your fellow kinsmen takes precedence over your minor benefits. We think even if you only have sticks and stones, you're bound to fight, more so when you have airplanes and guns and the ability to actually do some damage to the invaders. Why do we think the principal obligation is the most important issue in this debate? Firstly, we think it's completely not reliant on practical impacts, right? If we show you, and we have shown you, that they're morally obligated, they signed contracts, that they're the only ones who can act, that everyone else took certain actions because they expect them to act, then even if there's no benefit, simply put, morally, they have to do it. Secondly, we think, and the info slide says, their chances of making a tremendous difference are not that great, right? They're likely to die in either case, and the bombing is going to go ahead whatever happens, with slight differences here and there. But the damage or the principal obligation is binary. It either completely happens, they either fulfill it to its full extent, or they do not. And so the impact here of this issue is the greatest in the debate. And so by showing you that they have to do it, we take the most important clash. At this point, I'll take CEO.
Look, if you use fighting as an obsolete principle, then you have to concede that you would support shooting down a Nazi plane and that Nazi plane ruining an entire neighborhood and murdering innocent civilians.
we think the Nazi plane will murder innocent civilians in either case, right? But being that they can take it out when it's out of Belgrade, before it hits, over fields, over villages, because German pilots are likely to try and land in a field and not get killed when their plane crashes, the chances of you shooting down a plane and it killing civilians are far, far smaller than the chances of it sending its bomb over civilian houses and killing them, because that's what they're going to do. Secondly, why we think in all likelihood this will save lives, right? Because we think even if the overall result doesn't change, even if the planes will attack Belgrade and will drop bombs on it over civilian infrastructure, over civilian houses, over areas where people live, we still think we can nudge the needle a bit, right? We can change the outcome for specific people, right? 4 reasons why that's the case. A, we're likely to score at least a few kills. It's 10 airplanes. They all have guns. They're all well qualified. They've all trained probably specifically against the German military. And so when they take to the sky, they're likely to shoot down 1, 2, 12 planes with all their bombs, all of their ammo. And so this is bombs and ammo that won't fall on civilian houses, won't harm power stations, won't make people miserable during this attack and during the following days when they'll see less rubble and less destruction in their city. Secondly, now the Germans have to spend time and ammo and gas fighting these planes, evading them, taking a fight, and not just flying according to the preconceived Russian, optimally attacking whatever happens. Thirdly, we think they have to change their planes. They have to change according to a different angles of attack. They have to focus more on military installations instead of factories and civilian infrastructure and places where resistance is likely to happen in the next step. And so they'll attack these targets where fewer civilians are held and kill fewer civilians. Lastly, we think, simply put, these pilots are likely to die in either case. First, because they're in a city that's being bombed by the Germans and just randomly they're likely to be killed. Secondly, because the Germans are likely to look for them if they try to flee. If Alp tries to say they'll fight somewhere else, they'll be hunted, they'll be looked for. There's no planes for them to get to, and there is no way for them to get to London and join some sort of French free movement. So overall, we think they're likely to save at least a few lives of at least a few civilians. Secondly, we think the lives of any civilians outweigh the lives of these soldiers because they're innocent people who have no part in this fight and have no ability to protect themselves, whereas these soldiers are bound to do it and have the ability and have the capacity to try and fight. Lastly, we think they'll change the outcome at least a little bit, and this is just good. This means less destruction and less death. So even if we don't have a moral obligation to fight, we still get some benefits and still win on this clash as well. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech. If everyone on the panel is ready, I'm inviting the leader of the opposition to open the case for opening up.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I like speaking to a room of people, so if anyone feels comfortable opening their camera, that would make me happy. And I will begin my speech in 3. Oh, wait. Hopefully that'll be the last cough. In 3, 2, 1. There's a time to live and a time to die. Last stands are supposed to be brave, but they can typically be replaced with a retreat, allowing people to fight another day in the Royal Air Force. And this will be my first point. But given that Belgrade will fall anyways, what changes in this debate is the cost for the Nazis of taking the city. And as a result, the retribution they will give. The principle we are given by opening government is a practical in disguise. They tell us that you have the obligation to protect innocents, but this is just the practical impact of number of civilian casualties. We say it is principally unjust to give oneself the heroic last stand one desires when the cost of retribution will be paid by the citizens that they are obligated to protect, and that will be my second point. Let's start with my first point on the comparative, how these pilots are able to help more. And the first important thing to understand here is that pilots during World War II were the rarest resource period, more than steel and more than oil. Why is this true? First, because of the intense, long, and complicated training they had to receive. Second, because of the danger inherent to that training. We now have all sorts of pilot simulations to teach pilots. Back in the day, you had to get up and fly. That means that there was incredible cost. Every time you go for a practice run, the plane has to be refitted and fixed. The oil that you use is a cost to the country. The cost of the equipment the pilots use, the planes, were the single most expensive machine of war that a single person could run. A submarine maybe more, but there were hundreds of people on those. And it was incredibly difficult to get more pilots or more planes when you run out of them, since they take years to train and you don't have much time to train them during the war. Why do we think they can survive on the comparative? We think firstly, they can quit fighting early on. Once they see they're outnumbered, once the troops on the ground are overrun, once they have lost 20, 30% of their force, they can turn around and retreat like most forces in the world do. Secondly, they can take their planes with them. OG tell us they have no way of leaving this place, but we say they're literally in a plane. And if all the Nazi planes are busy bombing Belgrade, these people can just take their plane over to London. We think that even if they lose their plane, no one knows that they are pilots. They don't have a tattoo on their forehead saying so. And if they manage to use the resistance networks to sneak out of the country and reconnect with the Allies, they can become useful. How can they become useful? First, we have more strategic use of this resource of pilots. Unlike in Belgrade, they're not outnumbered. They're not fighting a hopeless battle where they're necessarily going to die. They're not suffering from a massive intelligence gap where the Nazis know what planes they have, how they're planning to deploy them, and they have no counter information. What are our impacts? Quantity of piloting. These people staying alive means every day that they stay alive is another day they can go on a bombing run to destroy important German military or industrial targets, or defend the skies and civilians from further attacks by the Luftwaffe. This secondly looks like quality of piloting, because we think that the Royal Air Force has all of the required alternative military capacity, such as military intelligence or infrastructure and technicians, to enable these pilots to have the maximum impact they possibly can. Why do we have a unique impact of having Serbian pilots? We have an existing comparative for this. Countries like Poland or France sent many of their pilots after their fell, or the pilots went themselves to join up with the Allies and continued serving. This is important because it meant that the Brits were not fighting alone. This looks like British morale remaining high. And as the Brits were being bombed for years and their entire economy, an entire populace were designated to the war effort, this is crucial. But secondly, it looks like pressure on the Americans to intervene. The Brits were constantly trying to prove that they were representing the world, the independent people, ethnicities, and nationalities. And the best way to prove that is to show that even if some of the governments are puppets of the Nazis, the people, the fighters in those countries are still on our side. This looks like a continued benefit to the Serbs because they have pride in their fighters, and the underground network continues to report to them that their fighters are continuing to attack the Germans and hamper the German war effort, but they're not held to blame because it is not the current government of Belgrade who is sending them or employing them, but rather the Brits. At the end of the war, this means that Serbia had fighters who fought consistently. Now, we now know that Yugoslavian militias will do well, but they didn't know this at the time. This is important because any country who just surrendered to the Germans didn't get nearly as much of a place at the negotiating table at countries like Free France, who continued fighting regardless, even while Vichy France cooperated. Let's take a POI from closing.
Yes, what you're proposing is literally a desertion. The punishment for that is death. So not only the Germans will be after you, it's also the Yugoslav army and the secret police. There is absolutely no way you can help.
I think that you are presenting a false dichotomy between fight to the death and desert, and my partner will further engage. Let's weigh this versus governments. We get their benefits of helping civilians and filling our principal obligation to them more, and we get it more definitively because we know that we will be able to have an impact. There is no waste of life required. Brave pilots with a wife and kids waiting for them don't have to sacrifice their life in vain, and we get to avoid German retribution. So let's quickly go into this point. How will this action be perceived by Germany? It's a symbolic action, as opening government have already said, saying we will fight to the death. We represent the endless will of our people for independence, an iron will that the Germans perceive as something that must be broken. They will further want actual direct revenge for the dead German pilots, who, as I analyzed, were a rare and useful resource, especially along with their knocked down planes. It is seen by the Nazis as meaningless killing. Why didn't you just accept your fate? It's like how the Americans view the kamikaze fighters. And finally, the Germans use this for deterrence. They want every further city that they attack to know that if their soldiers fight to the death, the civilians of those cities will get raped, their homes pillaged, their infrastructure destroyed, their energy and food resources stolen. This deterrence is something they have to show to turn Belgrade into a message for the rest of the world. How does retribution look better on our side? The comparative between active control and puppet states, between active military control and German police forces versus continued local independence. It looks like a government that cares about its civilians and tries to keep as many of them alive during this horrible war, versus one that just views them as exploitable for the sake of the German motherland. Because we have better impacts for every Serbian and for the war at large, go with opening opposition.
I thank the speaker for that speech. If everyone on the panel is ready, I will now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for opening government.
All right, just to make sure before I start, can you hear me?
Clearly audible.
Thank you. I'll be starting really soon. All right, I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. First point, why the principle is the most important thing in the debate and why we win it. Couple of reasons for this. Firstly, it is an absolute impact and it is much more certainty because you either fulfill your moral obligation or you don't, right? Every other case that is contingent on practical outcomes is just that, speculative, which means that it can either be true or not true. But here, because of the reasons we provided you and prove that there is actually a principal obligation, then we already win. Secondly, the delta and the change within the motion is just much, much higher because the impact of the of not fulfilling your moral obligation is huge. Rather than, maybe you get some victories there, maybe you get some losses here. Thirdly, it is independent, like we said, of any other practical outcomes. And lastly, they just have the explicit burden of justifying any other metric within this debate. And until they've done that, we are winning because you cannot allow this debate to fall on anti-consequentialist bias, right? Let's understand then why we win this practical principle clash. Because we give you 4 different moral metrics, right? Responsibility. We are the only actor that can impact the bombing to some extent, which means that we are morally obliged to do so. Secondly, we are contractually obliged to do this because we have already opted into every harm that the army can expose on us in order to defend our country. Thirdly, on agency, these pilots actually want this, right? And so we need to be able to give them what they actually want because this is what their deepest desires are. And fourthly, we just told you that defending your country is good in and of itself. The response we got from this panel is abysmal because they say it's a practical in disguise. Well, guess what? We still have 3 other points that you have not responded to. So let's do the explicit weighing on why we win the principle clash, right? 2 reasons for this. Firstly, we're explaining to you why specifically right now you have the moral obligation to fulfill the principle. Because in times of emergency and crisis, your moral obligation multiplies much further than it can be in the future. Because you signed up to do this right now, and you have to do this right now, which means that this is the most significant moral weight that you can do because this is the biggest emergency that is occurring right now. And the second reason is actually every other thing that happens in the future is speculative, right? Because we may or may not be able to fulfill our moral obligations in the future, because we may or may not die, we may or may not run out of fuel, which means that uncertainty, we're just fulfilling, even if they have a moral obligation in the future case, we're just fulfilling it on a much more higher probability, right? Because their principle is actually contingent on the practical, because they have to survive in order to fulfill for future moral obligation. And thirdly, notice again, they just need to respond to all of our moral material in order to actually take this clash. Until they've done that, we're still winning, right? Let's get on to the practical. Here they tell us a couple of things. Firstly, these pilots will survive because one, they can just stop when they are losing. I mean, I think pretty much the info slides take these mechanisms out of this debate, because we are by definition losing right now as the bombing is going to happen. And you know, it's just very clear to see that even they know that they can change very little. But secondly, right, because if you take your planes with you, like to London, do you know how much fucking fuel that is? Like, do you know how much like enemy territory you have to pass, how much airspace that is hostile to you have to go through, and how many of these other German pilots are going to be after you? Like, I just don't think that they can just say that on the counterfactual, all of these pilots just survive. I think they have the direct burden to do this, and don't let them get away with this, panel. We've given you plenty of reasons why these German pilots need to waste active resources, why they have the actual incentive to go after them. And notice again two other responses here, panel. Firstly, even though pilots are rare, we completely concede. I think this is useless analysis. They need other infrastructure in order to operate, which means that there is no civil. If there's significantly less civilian infrastructure, because we've been able to actually stop much less of the German harm, that these pilots can operate much less, right? But secondly, even if they run away and they find some sort of air base, right? The Germans like fucking seeing them run there, right? And they have an active incentive to go ahead and minimize these very rare resources, which means that even if they get away, it doesn't mean that their planes get away, because there's a very high probability that the Germans have an incentive and the capability to go and just bomb the roads that the planes get off through, or just the planes themselves, which means that it is very unlikely that we can have any future impact here, right? Secondly, on British moral, I think it's unimportant because they already tell us that they get that moral from other countries going ahead and joining them. But secondly, the British are just much less in danger, right? Which means that the actual important moral here is of the Serbian people, which is what I'm going to show right now. Before I do that, I would gladly take opening.
Yeah, it's enough for the Luftwaffe to avenge their fallen comrades by continuing to bomb Belgrade to counter the moral obligation to protect Belgradians that you analyze.
Yeah, I don't really understand the point of that information, like the point of that POI, because we just explained that we fulfill much more important, much higher, and much more urgent moral obligations. So this is something that you have to weigh off against the weighing that we've already made. Notice here, they tell us that there's already a resistance operating in Belgrade, right? This is crucial, panel, because this is the people who are actually most in danger, that we actually want to continue to fight. The influence on these people is significant, because on our side, these pilots have a legacy. They're seen as heroes. It puts in the mind and soul of the people who are in Belgrade, who are much closer to more than the British people and much care about these pilots, that there's something greater that we can fight for, that there is a greater chance that we can actually do this because we have been protected by these people, and we are giving motivation for continued resistance to the Nazi regime, both on the level of the civilian resistance who see that there's something to fight for, and secondly, on soldiers who on the comparative don't see their actual best resources and best pilots, abandon them completely. They don't know how they will respond. The Germans have every capacity and incentive to use this as active propaganda to deter the soldiers and the people of Belgrade to continue from fighting. This is where the actual change within moral happens, panel, because these are the people who are closest to it and are much more influenced by it. When they see the stories of heroes who have fought, they know that they can themselves go ahead, even if the chances are small. When they see that these people have abandoned them, they have much less of an incentive to continue the fight in and of itself, and much less chance to protect themselves. Very proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I now invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to conclude the top half debate.
Hello, am I audible, visible?
You are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before we begin, a few requests. First, my internet is a bit dodgy, so if at any point I am lagging or you hear me badly, please do let me know in the chat and I will switch to my phone. Sometimes it works better. First request. Second request, POIs please in the chat and please offer just one time. I promise I will take you, probably closing, I will take you somewhere around speech, I promise. Okay, so I begin with your permission panel at 3, 2, 1. 3 clashes. 1, practical, where we say more or less. Secondly, what is our moral obligation principle? Thirdly, what is the message we send? Let's begin with practical. First, why it's likely they will survive? Know the reasons given us by DPM. Firstly, it says there's no fuel. There was fuel already then. They can just take from some other factory. Secondly, it says, well, it's dangerous airspace. Yes, maybe some of them will fall in the airspace. But even if only half of them succeed and go to Britain, to other countries, all of IAL impacts stand. The impact practically in the British Army and the moral practicality, it's supported for the British to see the other countries that countries they are fighting for actively support them. So I think that like we totally win the clash on saving lives. I don't think that their specific action would have affected the results in Belgrade because of the huge power gap between the both sides. I do think it makes it worse for civilians. We didn't get any engagement to IAL's analysis about how the Nazis did not want to just hurt civilians. They said, and they uttered this, we are not hurting civilians unless we fight you. They wanted to recruit them to the Nazi cause. But if you do fight us, we are going to make sure you regret it. Those pilots, if they go against the Nazis, they are just causing the Nazis to say, we have to take revenge on who? On the bad people, to send a message. Sadly, we do not get any engagement to that. Our metric here is amounts of lives saved. If you believe that strategically it's better to go and continue to fight where you have fights where you more likely to have strategical impacts. And secondly, the Nazis will have some sort of retribution, which is extremely likely, then we win this metric and just more people are dead. This is also a principle. Secondly, let's talk about moral obligation. Several levels of response. On the first level, they have said they are not reliant on practicality, but all of their analysis relies on saving lives. Yes. So if you accept any sort of practicality thing on the other side, even if you say it might like the goal for their side, they don't have any principle. Note, secondly, their principles, I have signed, I have agreed, I have to take the most effective action militarily. So you've already answered the effective military, now let's answer to the point about my obligation to work in a heroic way. So we think those people are going to die. Why is this bad? The 10 pilots I'm talking about them now. Why is this bad? Firstly, this death is certain. We think this death has an element of coercion. We think the fact they take a collective action, 10 pilots, meaning they are effectively murdering themselves and murdering their friends. Why? Because it's very likely that not all of the 10 of them have the same heroic tendencies, want to fight for the guns, want to have this last will speak. Maybe some of them do want to live. Maybe their wife just had a baby. Maybe they also dream of being a scientist. Maybe they are social activists. Maybe they want to do something with their life. This means death. Why is this death coercion? Firstly, it's very hard to face up social pressure. If everyone says, okay, we are going against the Nazis now, I don't want to be the one that says, no, I actually prefer to live. I want to run away. Yes, continue to help with the war effort. Join the Air Force in Britain. Join the Air Force in other places. I just don't want to die now for this symbolic gesture that might not even work. Secondly, specifically in the army, I am used to obeying. Like the whole process in the military teaches you to obey and not to think for yourself. It's very hard in the army to disobey. You also take risks when you disobey. So they're used to obeying and they're used to seeing their commander like it's the person in charge of them telling them what to do. Meaning it's very hard to say no, specifically in the context of being a soldier. Thirdly, we think our comparative is unlikely if they are not all doing it together. If just one person says, well, I don't want to do it, I want to run away, it's much harder for them to go away and fight in other places. Because for our comparative, you need several pilots going together, protecting each other, planning the route, getting fuels, doing this together. We think this is a horrible impact. We think it's not allowed for this commander to request a soldier to commit suicide very surely when it doesn't have a strategic value for the long term, especially when they're most likely were conscripted. They did not choose to go to the military because there was an obligation to go to the military. This also enters OG. Secondly, even if they chose to go there, they did not choose and consent to die for 100%. They thought they're taking some risk. There is some likelihood they will get out of there alive. And even if they signed a contract to join the army, to sacrifice their life, this has a lot of meanings. I think a person cannot agree to sell themselves for slavery, and we will not enforce this contract because it's an illegal contract. So I think it's like something that we cannot do. Thirdly, their family and friends did not choose them. This is a horrible damage. Everyone pilot like this has a family, has friends. This makes it much more worse because they see, okay, they chose to leave me. Now let's wait. First, uncertainty. OG says, well, they would die anyway. We disagree. Again, analyze many other ways they could have lived. Nothing is more guaranteed. The only certain thing on government side, the day die. On our side, maybe they save more lives, maybe they stay alive. We think it's 10 different words, very important. Secondly, uniqueness. We explain to you why it's akin to murder to go and force the soldiers to go and die. Thirdly, this is an illegitimate act. We are logically prior. We are against it because we are against coercion. Secondly, the message. Why it's not like abandoning them. We think, firstly, and this answers to CG, there is no army anymore. There is no way to sell Belgrade. I cannot abandon something that does not exist. Therefore, it is not betrayal, not abandonment, because the army is gone. Secondly, we've analyzed why it's extremely likely they will continue to go in the military effort. They can go, if they don't manage to go, in the underground fight, join some, I don't know, kind of organization that fights against Nazis in a more way that is discreet, in not like a way that is like a suicide. They can go in a strategic way. In the military, you teach them. You never go into a fight thinking tactically. You think strategically about the whole world. When in this stage it was very clear, it's not Belgrade versus Germany. It's the Allies against Germany. A lot of countries versus Germany. When they commit suicide for Belgrade, they are effectively abandoning all of their allies. We think it also sends a very bad message before closing any extension. Whenever you want closing. Okay, why the suicide has bad opening, sure.
Yeah, so Germany already wants to conquer Serbia and puts a lot of effort into it. Plus, you already conceded there's a civil resistance, which means there's already much retribution. And the only thing that's important here is how motivated that resistance is. On retribution, there's no delta.
Thank you. Germany do want to conquer Serbia, exactly, but they want to recruit them to their side. I think there are many ways to go and oppose Germany. There are more discreet ways, going and sending spies and do stuff that don't think this big message. But Germany doesn't want to kill civilians. But when the Belgrade army does this action, it effectively forces the Nazis to do it because they have to send a message. Okay, about like a message. We think suicide has a bad image. Who suicides? The person who has no choice. The coward who chose to leave the situation. This for the citizens of Belgrade is horrible. They see where they left, but we have no military anymore. They feel when in the comparative, they were there fighting in other places. And if they die when they run away, it's because they want to join the Allies, Britain, to continue the war strategically. Also about their legacy, if they would have stayed alive, they can inform other people, tell their stories, and make sure they continue to talk about the Nazis' crimes. They need to win the war and not the fight. Here they are going to lose the fight and have very little effect of the war. This is just not the tactical, the strategic place to do it. We think strategically, when they go away and to continue to work in the war effort in other places, they have much more of like a message and impact. And because we win on the principle, win on the practical,
I thank the speaker for that speech. And if there are no questions on the panel, and if the panel is ready, I will now invite the member of government to open the closing half debate.
Well, I promised I'll be wearing a suit to the finals. That's what got us through the semis. So here it is, guys. Right, I'll be starting in 5 seconds. Novak spent 3 minutes of prep time telling me about his grandfather's brother whom died in a war as a soldier. Though he wasn't the pilot, he was always on the weaker side, and the stories of him live to date. We are going to talk about what is likely to happen if you as a pilot do not do this and why the comparative is much, much worse. Before that, few comments on opening opposition. And the first one is why you are more likely to help and why you will be able to help. Well, I have numerous amounts of response. Number one, notice that there's only 10 pilots. So I really doubt that 10 pilots, no matter how trained and good they are, can actually do some beneficial help. Number two, statistically, Nazis took over Belgrade in a matter of days. There's very little chance. This is a supports motion, right? We know that they took the city. They know you had no chance to fight. So just statistically and historically, you were unable to help them. But thirdly, you're also not only being attacked by the Germans, you're also being attacked by the Bulgarians and by the Italians. So literally no chance that anything will go good, right? Fourthly, notice that the Nazis use those very planes. You can't find them. They hit their very short diameter and everything else, but also the Nazis use these planes to bomb other cities. They take them away from you. Literally nothing you can do. But also notice that after this, the Yugoslav army collapsed. Zero chances of you actually helping them. I think this only exists in fairy tales. In reality, the city was taken over. The army collapsed. They took over all your airplanes and pretty much shot all of your comrades. This is the comparative. Prior to going on, just 1 point on opening government, because principle is fine, and I think they can. That's solidly analyzed and everything else. But I think we're going to show you why this is worse on our side. Also, principle is contingent on you actually helping these people. I think there is very little chance of you actually being able to help, because number one, you were attacked by 3 countries. Number two, army has collapsed and it was between 2 wars. You had no planes, you had no army, you had no infantry and everything else. Finally, there are 10 pilots. I don't really know how much you can help and everything else. On our extension, what is the alternative? Number one, you're very likely to be killed. Why is this so? Because it's exactly what opening opposition tells you. You're a trained great pilot. You can actually help the army. You can you know the army stuff. You're very good at this and everything else. But also the Germans were fucking crazy. They were killing people in the street. They know that you can possibly help. They're very likely that you're actually going to be killed as an alternative. Meaning that on both sides of the house you actually end up dying. But why is this important? Because if you end up dying, the comparative is you die as a coward. You die a cowardly death. So why is this? What does this look like in practice? You're being booed by the crowd as you're taken to the firing squad by your own countrymen because you're seen as a traitor, as someone who gave up on the army when they needed you the most, right? You're seen as a fool, as a collaborator. This is something that is a terrible cowardly death that is much worse on our side of the house. But notice, this is the time where the stories of heroism and how we fought the Nazis are very, very heavy. You need this as a mentality boost to survive the war and everything else. Notice that everyone who is seen not fighting in this war, seen as a terrible coward and a terrible human being, is being booed and shot and shot by the tomatoes, by the crowd that is watching them die. This is the alternative that's going to happen. But even if not, you're going to end up in a German concentration camp. So why is this worse? Because you'll still die on both sides of the house. But notice that all of the time, you have all of the time to think how much of a traitor you were, how much you turned your back on your comrades and your people, and this is terrible. But furthermore, and this is the most likely scenario, and this is very important, you're going to be used by the Nazis exactly because of the analysis given by the opening opposition. They need trained pilots. Notice that a lot of the pilots died in the war because it's already 1941. There's been 2 years of war. A lot of the pilots died. They also need the planes and the fuel that planes contain. But also notice that they need to win the war. They know that the war is drawing closer to the end. But also notice that training pilots takes years and years of practice. They don't have the pilots, meaning that what is most likely to happen is them using you as the pilot for the Nazi Germany. This is literally what happened. This is what we learn in history books. The way they do it is they threaten you. They threaten your family. They say, we're going to burn all your land and kill all your family if you don't go and fight for us as our plane. They just repaint the plane and you do all of these things. But what you do now is that you use the bombs that are meant to protect your city to bomb Belgrade further. You're used to bomb Belgradians and your countrymen and everything else. Notice that this is going against your own people. If you don't do these things, you'll be caught. It'll be used by the Nazi Germany because they need you. This is a terrible alternative. Notice opening government tells you you have some vague principle towards your countrymen. This means you're not only not doing anything and just running away, you're actually being complicit on our side of the house. If you're not going against the Germans, you're going with the Germans. You're usually used to bomb other people that are your countrymen. This is the alternative that is going on our side of the house. Notice Also importantly, you're usually going against your own comrades, because notice that other people in the army are still going to the war. So the infantry, the tanks, just people with guns and everything else, meaning that this is you turning back on them. Why is this important? Because notice that these are the people you were trained with. You're told stories how much of a heroes you are. You ate, you slept together. Notice there is also a codex of the army that tells you that you need to die together, you need to fight together, and the last man that you leave behind is your comrade. Notice that this is the important part of the principle, right? Because you turn your back on the people who are there for you always. If you were in the dying situation, they'd be that back to help you. You're turning your back on them, the infantry, the tanks, and everything else. So why is this the worst principle? Because those are the people, not only like your countrymen, which have some vague connection to you, you're very connected to these people. These people are the people you ate, you slept with, you trained with. These people were the ones you were told they're your actual family, your new family. This is whom you're turning your back on. But finally, let's talk about the family. This argument goes even if it's perfect, right? So even if like you win the war, which is not happening by the way, even if you like survive and they don't use you as a slave and everything else, why is this much worse? Because notice that your family are always marked. Notice that you are told the stories. This is the period of heroism stories and stuff. If you're the one that were the traitor, you're told the stories how bad of how much of an asshole you are. Notice that also communists came after this, and communists literally built their whole country on the principle of having like soldiers fighting and how much of heroes we were and how we were able to build the country from the ashes and stuff like this. This is what they're going to use as a narrative against you and your family. They're going to say this is the offspring of the worst traitor in this country, the guy who actually had the plane, had the chance to take down at least one German plane flying over Belgrade, and he didn't use that chance. He went somewhere else. He flew away to London as opposition wanted. This is extremely bad, because this makes your family get shot or exiled. This is literally what communists did in order to preserve the narrative that there were so much heroes and everything else. But also notice what is the comparative. This is actually going to be good for your family, because communists are actually gave people who were heroes in the war houses, villas. They were portrayed as heroes, right? There were stories in the books that we learn about how much of heroes they were, even though they died in the war. And that is why I mentioned Novak's grandpa in the very beginning of the speech, meaning that the principle on our side of the house is much worse. You turn your back on the people who you need to turn your back on the least. This is a much worse principle. You're used as a slave by the system to bomb Belgrade and other cities. More terrible alternative. You need to die in this war.
Thank you for that speech. I will now invite the member of the opposition to open the case for closing opposition.
I hope I'm audible. POIs in the chat, please. Hello to all the CNSPO kids and Latvians and Lithuanians watching. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. On the opening half, what are the uncertainties that you heard from OG and OO? I think first, like 100 Stuka bombers versus 10 pilots, don't know what's going to happen. Secondly, if you kill one German, you're not sure how many like lives lost you actually prevented. Third, you don't know how skilled these pilots are because they might have been conscripted shortly before the war started. Fourthly, you don't know what the backlash is from the Germans, right? Because they might like actually come in with like 100 extra Stuka bombers because they over-perceive what their like resistance is. They might kill more of other people's relatives, right? Fifthly, who cares about their narrative of heroism at the end of the day? Because like when you're actively being bombed, we're not sure whether or not people are going to know about these 10 people actually flying off and defending their country. So you don't know what happens, right? These are the uncertainties that you get on OG. But on OG's principle, like very quickly, just to make sure it's out of the debate. Firstly, there is probably no consent because no person can imagine the situation that they're in, right? This is a high-level, high-stress situation that probably nobody can imagine. So they don't have the say, oh, they have like this, oh, this is the principle that they need to enforce, right? Secondly, they probably still rely on practical impacts, right? Because they have to show us that even if you're killed, even if nothing happens to you, or like if you don't save other people's autonomy, as they say, like why that's still good, or even if you kill other people, like and cause negative utilitarian harms, why that's good. So probably OG is out of this debate. Now let's look at like CG and their uncertainties in this debate, because I think like because of this vague info slide, this is all about like the certainty that we can prove to you in this debate, which is also going to be in my extension. So what is like CG tells us? I think there are like three, or maybe two, three big uncertainties. First, They say, you're probably like gonna be killed. I'm gonna talk about like why it's still like better not outside the house. But like, will you be shot or will you like join the Luftwaffe? I don't think that like they tell you any reasons why one or the other is like more likely, right? I don't know. Secondly, like, will anyone care if you like die as a coward? Like, I don't know, right? Who knows about these 10 pilots or like their choices? Like, how significant is it that like your comrades are now gonna like come and be like, oh, you're a very bad person. You should like be shot up against the wall, right? I'm not really sure, right? Thirdly, say, you leave comrades behind. Like, again, I'm not sure how what happens, right? Like, probably these other people also have their more proximate concerns as opposed to like enforcing justice on other individuals when you're literally getting bombed and we're trying to save other people. So what is the probably like winning thing on CO? And I know this is going to be very strange because it's a very short and narrow impact to the most proximate people these 10 pilots probably have around them. But my impact is like, this gives people hope if you stay alive, or even if you're killed, as CG says, we're saying, yes, it's better for you to be killed and your relatives know the last moments in your life. So 3 points of analysis before like going into like impacts and why this is important in the general idea. First, the history, as I told you about the uncertainties, right, already, like when we're not sure of the utilitarian impacts of like lives saved or whatever, we think that this like history also probably washes you out. Like other people don't know whether or not you flew off in the last moments against this like huge like this Luftwaffe coming in, right? Because it's a high stress like situation. Individuals are probably also like trying to save their families because they're literally like going to be bombed. The air siren is calling, right? Nobody is thinking about this except probably, and this is the real stakeholder in this debate, the most proximate people to these 10 pilots, their families, their friends, like those people who are still in hiding and trying to like reach out to these people because they want to see those people in the last moments before their deaths, right? They are gonna know if they come to them. They're not going to know what's going to happen to them if they fly off, right? Because they're probably not like, you don't have WhatsApp. You can't text like, I'm like flying off to save your country. I really love you, right? No, these individuals are probably somewhat separated at that instance, right? So secondly, those people around you have very certain emotional investments and impacts, right? Like, why do we care about that? Because they don't know how you died. If you flew off somewhere fighting like 100 Stuka bombers that probably killed you in the first 5 seconds, they're going to keep questioning themselves. What were the last moments of your life? And they're not going to be sure what's going on with you in any case, right? Why does that, like, our counterfactual better is if these individuals went to their families and saw them, right? If it's a better alternative, both principally and like impacts wise, if they see that like it gives these people hope because they see that the individuals they care and most love are like trying to help them. They're trying to preserve them. What this gives you hope for even like the longer years of occupation if you're alive, right? Even, okay, if you're dead, then we're fucked on both sides of the house, right? But at least like even if this guy is like killed, at least you're sure that they fought for you as an individual. If you're like the single mother left afterwards, yeah, right? You're certain that this individual wanted to help you. Therefore, you're more likely to fight and preserve your life continuously even after these pilots have died, right? Because thirdly, like even if we buy the utilitarian analysis of like OG or like CG that we like need to like resist or whatever, right? We probably get more of these individuals around them also trying to preserve themselves and like also fighting and not falling into the abyss of thinking, oh, it's all over, right? It's war, right? They're not going to try to save other individuals if they have no hope, right? Now, at least they see that, these individuals actually care about us, right? We are going to try to preserve at least our own lives and help each other out in general. Before I move on to the importance of this argument, I'm going to take OG, yeah.
You can say your goodbyes and then leave. It's not mutually exclusive. And also, it is the least certain thing in the debate because you don't prove why that's the counterfactual. My family can be dead outside of Belgrade if they're displaced, or just they are not available right now, or you won't make it in time.
No, sure, yeah, but like I think that these are the most proximate emotional impacts that you can have on individuals. Like even if this impact is like uncertain, it's probably the biggest thing that you can prove in this debate, right? Because like you can't prove like who dies or who doesn't, but you know that these people care about each other because they have like wives, families, or whatever, right? So why is this argument important? Note first that people are probably like the most vulnerable. It's just like one single mother with a child, right? Who really cares about her dead soldier, right? Like, secondly, probably like war is already incredibly traumatizing. So these people need someone to rely on. If we believe that these like individuals have been somewhat trained, right? If they're soldiers, they're probably like more rational or like more calm minded in face of these difficulties. So they act as like coping mechanisms for the closest people that are around them to go through with this, right? Even if it comes to like dying at the hands of Germans, at least the last minutes of these lives of these individuals are going to be a lot calmer, a lot better, because they have the loved ones next aside to them. Because of all of these reasons, and I think that this is the like most narrow and like surest impact that we can prove to you in this debate, I'm very proud to stand in closing opposition.
Thank you for that speech. I will now invite the government whip to conclude the case for government bench.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
And hear me? Hear me is more important. Give me just a moment. Before I start, I want to say that this is an honor to debate you all. You're all fantastic. But we do plan to win this. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so Georgia brings you multiple arguments, both principal ones, both those that work on a principal level and those that work on a utilitarian level, why we get vastly worse outcomes. Let's see what CG tells us to that. Well, they failed to engage with the most of what was right. They say, oh, look, you're going to give hope to your family if you survive. But here's what we tell you. And I'll elaborate on that more if it's necessary. First, even if you survive and go to your family, you're probably all going to be locked up, because notice how this functioned. At the start of the war, Yugoslavia was crushed. It was surrounded on multiple sides by multiple enemies, much more powerful. The Yugoslav army was not fighting on a front for months. They were crushed in a matter of weeks. There was no resistance at the start. It would take months and even years for an adequate resistance to appear and to be able to challenge the Germans in a meaningful way, which they did later. But what are they going to do? And what did they do historically, this historical fact? Because as OO tells you also, pilots are an extremely valuable resource. Once they had full control of Belgrade, which was days after this event, they accessed the records of the military and locked up everyone that could be relevant. This did not happen in history with the pilots because the pilots were dead. They died a heroic death, but they locked up even people that are less relevant, like bridge engineers, mechanics, the people that ran tanks. They also locked up their families, because notice that none of these people would ever work with the Nazis unless something even more meaningful was threatening, and that was their families. That's why you had people actually like fixing Nazi war machines and so on, because their families were under the threat of being executed in the most harshest way. This is what they don't engage with at all. So if they tell you you're going to give hope to your immediate family, we tell you you're not going to give hope. Your family will be locked up in a camp waiting for their execution if you don't comply with the Germans. And if you die in the German war effort, at that moment, they would probably shoot your family because they wouldn't have any meaningful use for your loved ones. So no, there isn't hope for your family if you're left alive. You'll be used as leverage, and you won't be able to support them either way. I think that takes closing out of this debate. Reality takes them out of this debate. Okay, let's see what's the thing with opening. Opening makes this very far-fetched case that you will be able to help the allies by simply these 10 pilots flying and willing to fight another day. Look, this is basically impossible, because these planes and this is the mechanism that they use for you surviving, these planes could not fly to London. Even modern fighter jets like the F-22 require refueling in the air in order to reach a trip from Belgrade to London. They could at most fly to the Hungarian border, or Italy, not at all reach London. So their mechanism for actually fighting another day does not survive like any basic knowledge of historical machines. And even if they or even if they managed to get to London, they would probably be shot down because the people there wouldn't know whose planes they were. They didn't have the internet back then. Okay, what else? Then the other alternative is you would use the resistance. But notice that the moment that the Yugoslav army was crushed, there was no resistance. The resistance, it took months and for the resistance to actually like appear and only in remnants. After a year or two, they were very effective, the most effective resistance in the world against the Nazis per person fighting. But that would take time. And like our analysis shows you and history shows you, you would be locked up by the Germans. The Germans would probably, even if they don't use you right away, at the last few years of the war, at the last 2 years, every side was depleted when it came to regarding their pilots, because their pilots were dead, meaning that the Germans have a very strong incentive to actually make sure that you fly their planes, and they have all the leverage in the world. And until then, they will keep you locked up, because the German war machine was very evil, but they were not stupid, and they were not like that incompetent to let good pilots simply let them go. Meaning, what else does the opening give you? They tell you, oh, look, this would raise British morale. First, that is contingent on them proving that you're going to make it to London, which is like basically impossible in reality. And secondly, like, how would British morale change if 10 Serbian pilots or 2 of them made it to London? Like, would they even know? They certainly would not care. Some Serbians that were in London at the time, during the occupation of Yugoslavia, did fight for the Allies then, so you could get morale from that. Then you tell you're going to pressure the Americans. The Americans entered the war because their base on Pearl Harbor was bombed. They were attacked. 10 Serbian pilots in London, pressuring the Americans to enter the war. Like, sorry, guys, very, very, like, it's completely not true. Then they tell you you're going to have a better space at the negotiating table. They don't analyze it much. Honestly, it's extremely unlikely. Okay, opening, go.
If you get caught, then you fight them to the death. In our comparative, you can fly to North Africa or use the underground resistance to escape. Then you save more lives and also stay alive.
Guys. Like I told you, at the moment, there is no underground resistance. The army was crushed. It would take time for it to assemble. Secondly, North Africa. Like, guys, like North Africa is 2,500 kilometers away from Belgrade. You still don't have the capacity to make it to North Africa. What are you guys talking about? Thirdly, like, if they come to your home to find you, they are going to shoot your family if you resist. So you're far more likely to actually surrender, because you're going to have kids in the other room. And if you kill one of the German soldiers, then your kids are going to die. That's why they will have the ability to capture you then. Okay, let's compare ourselves to opening government. Opening government brings you three things. And they somewhat prove their principle, but we say that that even on a principle front, we are better than them, because they show you a way vague principle of you supporting the army. But notice that we tell you that you have a even stronger principle to support your comrades, because you live with them, you eat with them, they count on you, they're your friends, you forge bonds, and they were the ones in the infantry dying, they were not surrendering. Second, like, notice that when our analysis shows you that it's very likely that you're going to be able to fight for the Germans. Fighting for the Germans against the Yugoslavian resistance is the ultimate form of treachery. You're the worst of scum. If you do that, you're killing your own comrades, the people that are from your country that are trying to liberate you. You're killing them, and you know that you have to, because your family will be shot. You're protecting German bombers that are killing civilians. You're a monster. You're fighting for the most evil regime ever to be on this earth. Based on all of these things, comparing us to the other teams, I'm very proud to say that we win this debate, and everything else Georgia says, we have so much. I don't think there is a way we lose.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite the opposition whip to conclude the case for opposition bench and the debate as a whole.
Hi, I hope I'm audible. I would like my PRIs to be in the chat, please. If I haven't taken one by 5:30, feel free to unmute yourselves. And I'll begin my speech in a few seconds. Cool. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, I think the biggest mistake that every single team has made in this debate is that they set the burden for themselves to literally solve, like, destroy the Nazi regime. I think that's fundamentally really unlikely to happen. Why? Because we're talking about 10 pilots. Sure, they might be really talented pilots, they might be the best in the country, but at the end of the day, we agree with closing government when they say that they're likely to die anyways, how we win this debate is by proving to you that even if you have 5 additional minutes during which you do not crash into a Nazi plane and don't die, those 5 minutes are going to be of massive benefit both to you, to your family, to your neighbor, or anyone else in your close proximity. And that is the most important thing. Why? Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about victims, if we're talking about morality, these things are likely to be washed out over the course of the war and the occupation that will go on for years. This is one instance. That is why we're talking about the 10 pilots. That is why we're going to win this debate. Very quickly then, why do we take over every single team in this debate? Opening government. I think it's like, they probably think it's kind of ironic that I'm wearing a shirt that says "Be brave like Ukraine," right? Because they think that the only way for you to be brave is to crash into a Nazi plane. They never explained and justified as to why that's actually the case. We're telling you that even if we assume that you have this like overwhelming duty to protect your country, there are so many other ways to do that. And at the end of the day, killing yourself is rather selfish, because then you minimize the chances of like actually having a marginal impact on someone close to you, saving them, leading them to a hideout and whatnot, right? So we are going to be brave like Ukraine. We are going to be brave like these soldiers, even if we don't kill ourselves. Opening opposition essentially said that these soldiers are much more useful if they stay alive and if they hide like in Belgrade and they lead the revolution and whatnot. Look, we agree with closing government when we say that you're likely to die, right? Because you're a pilot, you're kind of like, people understand that you're highly valuable, probably well-trained and whatnot. So like the impact of you like contributing to the morale is kind of minimal, because at that point we think that like these impacts are simply too big to prove and the burden is too big to like talk about. CG essentially talks about morale and about where we're more likely to like have more backlash and whatnot, and how like what the narrative surrounding these people is going to be. I think the rest of us has dealt with this relatively well by saying that like, look, you're literally about to be bombed. You're literally about to be occupied by Nazi Germany. You probably really don't care about the 10 pilots and what they actually did. The narrative is not going to be relevant until like probably the 21st century, right? What matters is the instant impacts that you have on other people, which is why, again, our metric wins us this debate. So firstly, I'm going to talk about principle, and then I'm going to talk about the benefit that you have for other people, right? Principle. Essentially, we want to like first rebuild the extension that we have given you, which like talks about hope and why it's so important. Essentially, first of all, we think that CG's refutation, in which they say that, oh, well, what your family is more likely to be killed on opposition if if they see you as a traitor or whatnot, if they think that you have valuable information. And like, we think that the families, your family is likely to die anyways if Nazi Germany considers you to be a person of high value to the Belgrade military, right? The fact of the matter is that there's probably less likelihood of your family or your closest friends being murdered if you don't murder Nazis in the first place. If you go into hideout, even if you don't lead the social revolution or anything, we think that there's probably going to be less backlash because you're literally like not as actively contributing to like the collapse of Nazi regime. But then secondly, right, we're telling you that if you are alive, if you actually end up somehow surviving, like hiding out, we don't think that it's likely that you're going to fly out to London, right? We think that this characterization is relatively okay. It gives you hope. If your neighbor is a soldier, and if the neighbor tells you, okay, now we need to go underground and we need to actually fight against the Nazis, then you're going to be inspired to actually fight. Why is that? Because we have the fiat to tell you that these pilots will be in support of actually contributing to like a revolution and to like actual opposition. If you are willing to kill yourself by flying into a Nazi plane, you're going to be willing to like die accidentally by burning up secret documents or like by blowing up a route that will prevent like Nazi tanks from like entering into your city or whatnot, right? But then secondly, even if you die, you're at least not going to be washed out of history. We think that like these decisions are usually made in the matter of a few minutes. So no, you probably are not going to be able to run back home at dawn and like say goodbye to your family. Likely your family is going to see like fireworks in the sky and they're not going to understand what happened, and they're going to be really, really depressed. At the point at which you decide that you're going to go home to your family, you're going to hug your child, even if you're going to be sought after and like murdered, right, by Nazis when they occupy the city, we still think that this is a fascinatingly good thing to do because it gives you closure, because you're a natural human being that actually cares about the individual relationships that you have. This is super important. And even if you don't have friends, at least you can spend those 5 minutes with your comrades on the ground. Even if you're smoking a cigarette during that time, it still gives you such a massive individual benefit that it is going to be much, much better than anything else that we're talking about. We think that you're likely to be washed out of history anyways, so the personal impacts are the most important to happen, right? comparative is you're just like nobody's going to care about you essentially, and these narratives about you being a traitor or whatnot are not likely to be relevant in the very first moments of occupation. What does then OG say when they essentially talk about like this duty and contract to protect your country? We think that once again they never justified as to why there's like protecting your country does actually look like you flying into a Nazi plane, because like the likelihood of you actually causing some benefit is very, very minimal. If you bring your neighbor to a hideout, that is so much more better because you're 100% sure that he did something good. Before that, I'm going to take closing.
Look, they wouldn't kill a family of a dead pilot. Even if your family survives the concentration camps, the Yugoslavian communist government treated these people as the people that retreated against the Nazis as the worst scum. Your family will be stigmatized for decades.
Got it. Look, if you fly into a Nazi plane, Nazis are going to make it a personal vengeance to look after your family and to murder them, right? Because they think that like this person is a particularly like great evil to the regime in and of itself. But like also like it's probably unlikely that they're going to hunt down the families anyways because they care about occupying the city and don't have as many resources to do that, right? Benefit to others then. We think that like overall you being seen as a collaborator or not seen as a collaborator is kind of a wash, because in Europe the general narrative is Nazis are the fucking worst, right? And we're going to do everything that we can to destroy them. So the 10 pallets are again not going to be relevant. Once again, we agree with closing government in them saying that you're likely to be murdered. So then we need to talk about maximizing the very 5 minutes or the very 1 day that you have. So A, you contribute to the safety of those around you, and then B, like you make someone feel better, or at least you make like yourself feel better by like having these last few moments of closure, right? We think that you are in a unique position to have some sort of agency over your life. And that is why in 1941, on April 6th, you go home, you hug your kids, and you wait for whatever is coming. That is why you vote closing opposition.
Thank you for the speech, and I thank all of the speakers for an enjoyable debate. I now invite all the speakers to virtually cross the floor, shake hands, and leave the room so the panel can deliberate.